Edition of the super excited about today's guest. We have Lisa Farris with us today, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of a really innovative company called Soundtrack Your Brand. So what Soundtrack Your Brand does, and she'll probably say it a lot more elegantly than I will in my intro, but it essentially gives you a licensed catalog of music, over 30 million songs, that if you're a small business, you're a retailer, you're a spa, you're basically using background music in any type of commercial application. Believe it or not, you're not supposed to just turn on your iTunes account and start playing songs. You're supposed to do it in an official way that honors the artist and make sure that those folks are compensated for their time and their work. So a fascinating category that I didn't even know existed until I started to do the background research on Lisa. But Lisa also has a breadth of experience in leadership roles, including the Chief Innovation and Marketing Officer of the Recording Academy of America, which you know most likely from the Grammy Awards, and also had senior leadership positions inside of companies like Universal Music inside of their innovation lab. So Lisa, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Dylan. Great to be here with you.
Awesome. Well, Lisa, I'd like to start to just hear a little bit more about your background, essentially from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So would you mind maybe walking us through any of the gaps that maybe I didn't touch on, or maybe expand a little bit more about some of your background that kind of led you to this very interesting background in music and innovation and technology, and brought you to your current role as CMO at Soundtrack Your Brand?
Sure. Well, it goes back to the days of working in advertising, actually, in New York. I grew up in New Jersey. And while I was working in advertising, and during my first year of college, at night, I would help manage a bar, by the way, that happened to belong to my landlord. And in doing so, I had to advertise all the bands who were coming through.
Oh, wow. So you're like the booker for it as well, huh?
I was chief cook and bottle washer at one point. To be honest with you, I wasn't old enough to drink when I was doing it.
Wow.
The drinking age had just changed from 18 to 21. At any rate, so I really moved into advertising in New York City and worked with a company that they were the second biller for under Coca-Cola in New York, and a lot of it was around concert advertising and music. And slowly I had an opportunity to move into music publishing. And at the time I thought music publishing was too boring. And it is actually one of the most interesting areas, maybe not when you're 21 years old, but it's really where a lot of the money is made in music. And then from there, I had an opportunity to move out to Los Angeles to become a product manager at a record company. And as I was moving out to Los Angeles, they changed presidents who didn't believe in product managers. He come from Geffen, and so I came out to a zero job.
Wow.
And I started working for a company back in New Jersey that was doing some really creative things and things that are important to the music industry to this day, which is direct-to-consumer marketing. Before, the music industry had always felt that they made decisions about the music. They put out the music, sold it to retailers. Now it's distributing to streaming services. And in those days, it was, radio promotion, and radio and retail were really the main primary forms of the way you marketed music. And we began putting bounce back cards inside of CDs that people would return to build databases of active music buying consumers. And we amassed a database of over 25 million active music buying consumers. And we did lots of other things. It was one of the first research companies in music back in the day. It was called Music Marketing Network. And while I was working there, having flown out to California for a job and having no job, I realized that in that role, consulting for pretty much every single major record company, I had such a different perspective, and I got to work with everyone. And I would get job offers all the time. But one day I was at South by Southwest, and one of my clients, who really understood research because he had run MTV for a while, said, "Please come to MCA Records. I want to build a research department. I want to do direct to consumer marketing. I want to do alternative marketing. And I think because he had worked in television for a period of time and not just music, he understood the power of that. So that's how I ended up at Universal. I actually started working for a gentleman by the name of Abby Konowich, who I'm still friends with today, because he was visionary and really understanding that it went far beyond what that current music market was.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I was asked by Edgar Brofman and Larry Kenswell, who was head of business affairs at the time, to merge into this new area where really digital was taking off. And we had a great team. We looked at every single opportunity from a technology development standpoint. In other words, did the technology work? From a business development standpoint, did it make money? It is shocking how many people would come and pitch to us things that could never make money. And then I oversaw market development, which was, did people care? Sometimes you hit two of those things, but not all three.
Yeah.
And so we kind of sat at the center of Universal Music Group and working very closely with each of the labels. And at first it was the new media people, and later on, as it evolved, it became the heads of each of the labels. And it, to this day, the same thinking that we do now really evolved from that time, and it was an incredible period. Sean Fanning from Napster would walk around our office with the person who was head of tech, Albie Galutin, and it was not that Universal was trying to kill Napster. Mm-hmm. They sat with Sean and said, listen, what you built was great, but how do you make money? And he had no idea. He just, created this really cool thing that kids were using to listen to music to.
Yeah, what I really appreciated from doing the research on you over the last couple of days is I feel like from an outsider's perspective who kind of grew up in the tech industry at that time, early 90s was when I was getting into the industry. There was always this kind of portrayal that the music industry didn't adapt fast enough, and they were trying to, slow down technology, and that they were this big behemoth, bad, these kind of old school fat cat, suits sitting up in their corporate towers and finally kind of getting their comeuppance from the tech bros. And I think what was really interesting about learning doing some of the research on you and the stories that you shared with colleagues and other interviews is that, no, you guys were right by their side, trying to figure it out, trying to test things and figure out where the business models were. And it was really these tech guys that were actually kind of more the sinister guys in the plot, so to speak, and essentially maybe, trying to destroy the model and kind of be, typical disruptors and stuff like that. But it was interesting to get that kind of alternative narrative by, doing some of the research on you over the last few days.
Both are true, though, Dylan. To your point, there were a few people who were at the top that just didn't grow up with technology. So they were uncomfortable with it. But the people who were really running day to day very quickly saw that the market was changing. And there were some people in technology who were brilliant and were passionate about music and really did it because they love music. And then there were some others who were trying to build a business on the back of artists. And we still find that today, sadly.
I love that. Well, sorry for interrupting.
No, this is,
interesting.
It's definitely part of the evolution. What I realized while I was at Universal, though, was now, internet had exploded, and we no longer had to put bounce back cards inside of CDs. We could get people to hop online and share their name and tell us why they loved Jimi Hendrix never before in that order. So from there, Vivendi came in and bought Universal. It was no longer as much fun in those days once Vivendi acquired the company during that period of time. And I left and started my own company. So I started a children's edutainment company, doing all the things that I wanted to do, like research and for better or for worse, had a quick success with it and flipped that company within 18 months, thinking that this was easy. I could just flip companies. Doing the first one, being successful at the first one is not always your friend.
I bet.
And then after I sold that company, I had gotten a call from a VC that I had pitched, trying to raise money for my startup, who said, we're not really interested in investing $6 million in your company because we're investing $100 million in larger companies. But we do have this one company called Move, who owns Realtor.com. And they
Oh,
could really use some help if you would just go talk to them.
yeah.
And I went and I met with their head of corporate development, and he was brilliant. And we got along famously. And so I started consulting for them, and the board decided that they wanted a CMO. So I ended up joining them, and I was with them for about 2 years until they moved the company up to Silicon Valley because they wanted the engineers of Silicon Valley. And then I started my second company, which was called Get This. And what we did was we shop-enabled television. And we did a television show as part of our prototype with ABC, which was Scandal. And so every single week we would show the look for Olivia Pope and the look for Les.
Wow.
I love doing Scandal, but candidly, I didn't want to do Scandal because I knew that there was a very small population of women that bought $7,000 Armani suits. I kept saying, I want to do Nashville. They're like, no, we want you to do Scandal. I said, no, really, I want to do Nashville. And finally, one day they called me. They said, if you keep pushing Nashville, you may not get Scandal. I said, Scandal's lovely. And it was, it was a bit before its time. This was right when iPads had come out, but it was a phenomenal experience. And there's still definitely a market for people who leverage entertainment to drive commerce.
Yeah, they're still trying to figure out how to make even digital video shoppable, right? And make the user experience. I mean, TikTok, $2 billion, and they want to 10x that this year. So we'll see.
Well, there's a market for it. And it's easy for me to say this. We had an amazing UX. But, that is another example of two industries that really need to come together. And because I grew up respecting copyright, I did work with the television companies. I was told by prospective investors to forget about working with them and just go and do it separately, which we could have done, but it really wasn't the right way to do it. Nonetheless, I did sell that company, not in the same way that I flipped the first one. It was much more difficult. And then I took a year off and did some work with Loyola Marymount University as an entrepreneur in residence, working with young entrepreneurs. I wanted to give back a bit because I had learned a lot. As a not an engineer, female living in Hollywood, trying to raise money in Silicon Valley was a great experience. And I did that for 2 years, and then joined the Grammys for the Recording Academy for just over 2 years, which was interesting because I had never worked for a not-for-profit, which is probably the most fascinating dynamic of NARIS. And after that, got a call from someone regarding Soundtrack Your Brand, and have had an amazing 2 years of, like you, I mean, I knew that, there were B2B companies that provided music for businesses, but it's, I really never understood the dynamic of it and the challenges and the opportunities, especially today, in terms of leveraging music to differentiate your brand.
Yeah, no, I love it. Well, I'm excited to dive into what you're doing today, but I did want to touch briefly on your Recording Academy experience because you did so during probably one of the more interesting times in recent history. You were smack dab in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and thank God it's behind us, and the music industry, from all signs that I've heard, has recovered well from pre-COVID times as far as concert attendance and streaming revenue and profitability. But would love to just get a quick vantage point from your seat being in that role during COVID. Like, what was that like?
It was an eye-opening time because, the Recording Academy, part of what they do is represent music creators. The other part is the Grammys. I always leaned toward the part where our mission was to represent music creators and make sure that there was a thriving business for them to come to on a daily basis. And what COVID did was pull that prospect from under so many creators. If you were a top creator and you were making money, either you had enough money in the bank or you could weather that storm. But if you had been told, if you were that mid-level artist and had been told for years, don't worry about what you're making from selling CDs in the past, and now you're streaming music and or making a little bit of money left from downloads, go get your money from touring, and suddenly that shuts down overnight. And it's not just the music creators, it was the entire infrastructure around them. It's the people that you forget that, that are on the road to make the tour managers, the roadies, the people, the sound men and women, all of the people that it takes to put on a live show and a live tour. And it was a really difficult time. So part of it was to boost Music Cares, which is a sister company to the Recording Academy, and raise as much money as possible. And I will say there were some companies such as Spotify and some of the artists. I mean, the Grateful Dead did put out one of their old live shows every single week, and the money went to Music Cares. Wow. People showed up, and you really saw what people were made of during that time. And we would get calls every day of, how can I, make money and give back? Because in that moment, when everyone goes to artists, when there's something going on in the world, for the first time, artists needed the rest of the world to be able to continue to make music. And then we did a series, I think most of them are still up on YouTube, on so what do you do? So now you're home. Many of these people, by the way, had not been home for more than 6 months and years because they're on tour most of the year. How do you make money? What are some of the ways? And so we did NFTs, became hot during that period of time. Could you teach music online on YouTube? Could you do, outdoor concerts? People were getting so creative. They were doing, yard concerts, and there were so many different things on how can you get creative and still make a living. And so that's a lot of what we did. We did do one Grammy during the Grammy show during the pandemic. Probably the most challenging show that anyone has ever done. You come together and you figure out how to pull it off.
Yeah. Well, props to you for the work that you're able to do during that time, and coming out successful from it, and all the things that you're able to accomplish. So thanks for sharing that insight, because I think it's a moment in history that's worth visiting. Where were you and what were you doing during that time? So I want to jump into the business model for Soundtrack Your Brand. I found this so fascinating, the idea that you guys provide companies, whether that's retailers, spas, anybody basically that plays music as atmosphere inside of their physical locations or businesses. What stops companies these days from just streaming a Spotify account in their business or iTunes? And what are the implications for a business if they get caught, doing that in an unofficial way, other than just the fact that it's wrong and that they're stealing from artists?
So unfortunately, when you get into small and mid-sized businesses, the percentage of businesses that do it is great. And it's not necessarily their fault. They don't quite understand that you can't do it, because the music industry has made it so complicated in some instances. If you think about that, you have ASCAP, BMI, CSAG, GMR, so 5 PROs. And then you actually, if you want to play Harry Styles' official album, you need to be able to leverage that master. And so you need to either have a sound exchange license, which is the statutory license that people are getting that a business licensee would get to be able to deliver that. And the consumer DSPs are not licensed to stream music in a place of business. So you would essentially have to get all of those licenses in order to do it. Or you use a business entity like Soundtrack Your Brand, and we have a few larger competitors, but that don't do it on demand. And so the founders of Soundtrack Your Brand, Olasars, together with Greenhoused within Spotify, said, well, since we know that over 76% of small and mid-sized businesses are misusing consumer DSPs, they don't want to have to give up what their experience is, which is to play whatever they want when they want.
Yep.
And so Soundtrack Your Brand was built as this on-demand system that would provide them with the same experience, but in an affordable manner, including all of the licenses that they need to be able to play music.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, I loved in some interviews of how you made the juxtaposition of like, you would never go to a movie theater and they just fire up a Netflix account and start playing, a movie in a place of business like a movie theater. And you gave another couple of examples that I thought were pretty funny in the illustration. But like, yeah, it's true. Like these services are designed for home use, for individual use. They're not designed for business use. And I shared with you an example of, a unnamed cigar lounge that I love to hang out in. I won't even say what town it's in. They love to buy the UFC fight and play it and do a little barbecue in the shop. And the reality is, they've been caught for doing that. They have people that walk around to all the little clubs in the town on fight night, and they walk around and look for copyright infringement, and people get slammed and they end up with big lawsuits. And we don't want to scare business owners, but I imagine there are some realities of like, if you get caught, streaming music in your place of business and you don't have the right licensing, you could be looking at maybe a situation that you didn't think was so innocent, right?
Yeah, there's I'd hate to see a small business get those fines, because they do range from $7,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the instances. But I will say there was just recently an article in Bloomberg that the Apollo in Las Vegas was slapped with a $260 million lawsuit for playing karaoke from YouTube.
Holy cow.
So they can range. Usually what will happen is at some point, one of the PROs will walk in very similarly and ask them if they're properly licensed. And here's the challenge. Someone might have an ASCAP license or a BMI license and think that they're clear. You need all four. And if you don't, then you need to be really clear about the music that you're playing, because each performing rights organization represents a different catalog of music.
Mm-hmm.
And so just because you have one doesn't mean you need to get the others unless you're super clear and you're only playing a very small section of music.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I imagine as you scale up from the SMB ecosystem into larger retail environments, say the Gap, or like retail environments where there's uniformity around the user experience on a nationwide footprint, I imagine large retailers already understand this, and it's something that they plan for and they build in business models for. Can you talk a little bit about the idea of sonic branding and the idea of like, atmosphere is important, and what music you play as part of the overall user experience, especially as it pertains to the retail experience, which is being, reinvented before our eyes, especially in shopping mall, kind of more high-end shopping mall experiences across America. Like, how much is music important to what you would consider like sonic branding and the overall user experience of the larger retail shopping sector, dining sector, et cetera?
It's incredibly important, and sophisticated brands really realize that. We do music for Lululemon. We do music for IKEA. Wow. We do music for Joe and the Juice, just as an example. We also do music for the coffee shop around the corner, and they have the same tools. It's just the approach. I've joked about that. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If people really understand that they can leverage music in a very cost-efficient way to help differentiate their brand, it really makes a difference. I think restaurants and hotels have really dialed it in. You think about the atmosphere of your favorite restaurant. It's not just the genre of music that they play. It is the atmosphere that they create, its volume, It's changing the music throughout the day, because you're not going to play the same thing in the morning that you are on a Saturday evening. And so all of those dynamics are really important. And it's not about who your favorite artist is. It's what is the demographic and what is your brand ethos, so that you can really select the music that's right for the atmosphere and the vibe that you're trying to create within your establishment. Now, some companies do it have a very interesting approach. Some companies will say, I want the same music to be playing in any store around the world, wherever they are.
Wow.
That is our brand. And if you show up to a furniture store in Sweden or a furniture store in LA, we want that vibe to be exactly the same.
That's
Where
cool.
with Lululemon, for example, they will provide, we curate X number of playlists per month, and the store managers and the general managers have the ability to kind of choose what's right for their location.
That's cool.
Talking to a Lululemon manager in down near you, near San Diego, where they have a big country market.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you probably don't have that in New York City.
Right.
And,
Yes, there's some localization that may be right for a certain brand, where maybe another one, they want that same song playing no matter where the person is anywhere in the world. Yeah, that's really cool.
And by the way, it's not wrong or right.
Yeah.
It really is what that brand needs. And for a small business with 1 or 2 stores or 10 or 20 locations can have those same tools as these big conglomerates who are really smart about how they choose their brand.
That's cool. And I imagine, so you mentioned that Spotify is either a partner or an investor. Is the user experience kind of synonymous with a personal Spotify account? Is it similar? Can you kind of, if you're already is it like, upgrading your Spotify account to Spotify Pro in a way, or something like that? Like, what's the similarity with Spotify, or what kind of benefits do you get in being having Spotify as a strategic partner / investor? Tell me a little bit about that relationship and how that helps the process.
Sure. Well, it's evolved completely separate from Spotify these days. So Ola actually greenhoused Soundtrack Your Brand within Spotify. In fact, it was called Spotify for Business originally. And then he rolled it out to be its separate company, and it became Soundtrack Your Brand. But there were a lot of learning. So Ola also created Beats Music with Jimmy Iovine back in the day, which is really how he went back to Spotify and said to them, hey, there's really an opportunity here that is untapped, because we know that people are misusing music. Let's give them the option. Because the option before this, quite frankly, in a way, I blame some of the antiquated B2B services for the fact that consumers today businesses today are misusing consumer services.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want another jump drive sent to them or a hard drive with music. They were like, I've got mine right here in my phone. I'm just going to play this. And so really it evolved because the music streaming had evolved significantly.
That's cool. So I wanted to tap on the idea of artist or song discovery in sonic branding. Is there a way for artists to kind of take advantage of this ecosystem of commercially available music and kind of push their songs out through your network, and if I'm an emerging artist and I've got a new album dropping, is there a way that I can get my songs played inside of retail locations through your network and kind of use it as not only a way to recoup and get additional revenue, but can I use it to promote or market my music?
It's a great question. So a couple things. Any artist who has commercial distribution, so whether that's they have a major record label deal, they have distribution through Merlin or CD Baby or one of the independent distribution platforms, usually will get imported into a Soundtrack Your Brand a catalog. Today, we have over 100 million tracks.
Wow.
And more tracks are being released daily. How to get it there? Not every piece of music will be played in a commercial environment. Some companies refuse to do anything that has explicit lyrics, explicit content. There's a difference between the type of content and a lyric that might be inappropriate. And then in a business environment, you will have certain genres that over-index. So singer-songwriters do really well. Electronic music does very well. Jazz happens to do very well, depending on the type of business. Ambient
elevator music, right?
I obviously I don't love that term anymore, but yeah, I suppose it's. By the way, rock and country are still huge, depending on the type of business. If you go into any bar, by the way, around the world, I was at our main offices in Sweden this past December. And our head of music said, country music is getting really big in Sweden. I never thought I would hear those words.
Wow, that's crazy.
We actually are launching tomorrow the 2023 kind of outlook of music that was played throughout the year. And Latin music and jazz increased this past year.
Wow. Okay. That makes a lot of
Perhaps
sense.
not so surprised about jazz, but Latin music is definitely seeing an increase of what's being played in stores. And the difference between Soundtrack Your Brand and any other B2B company is that the other B2B companies are based upon what's being curated for them. Where with Soundtrack, because you get to choose what you want to play when you want to play it, the dynamic of what people are selecting to play in their venues is really interesting.
That's cool. So you guys give the user the same experience and freedom that they're used to when just curating their own playlist at home.
That's exactly right. And they can either do it themselves, or they can hire a curator, or they can hire us to do it. It really depends. Each company does it a little bit differently. And then the other thing is, they don't only have to choose by artist or genre. We have the ability we allow people to choose by energy, by sound. Sound could be anything from, I'm looking for something that's happy. It may be more of a feel, or that atmosphere that they want to create. And that's some of the things. In fact, we were looking at it, 16% increase in 2023 of happy music, and we attribute it to what's going on in the world, that people are really looking to spark a bit more joy and happiness in their businesses.
Yeah, I love that. Is AI playing any part of innovation in your category? Obviously, it's the hot topic in so many categories, but I think about, can music change based on time of day, or how many people are coming in, and like can music curation in a retail setting be smart and kind of cater to the mood or the time of day, or is it raining outside or not raining? Like, is that something that's even on the horizon yet?
I love the weather piece. We're actually looking at a lot of different things right now. Great question though, Dylan. Here's how we use AI today.
Cool.
When you put together a playlist for your Saturday evening party or your workout, that's what, 45 minutes, maybe 2-3 hours. Imagine putting together playlists that last 8, 11, 12 hours a day. Wow. And so it sounds very romantic and fun when you first think about, I'm going to put together a playlist for my coffee shop or my restaurant. Or if you have a hotel and you have multiple zones, you're going to play something very different in the lobby than that you're going to play by the pool or in the retail store, in the spa. And so places where we use AI, and it's always combined with human curators, they will put together a segment of the ideal atmospheric sound for that business or venue or location. And then they'll leverage AI to make recommendations to fill out 8 hours of music or 12 hours of music.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool, because like you said, it starts off as, this is going to be so much fun. And then it's just like, wow, this is a massive to-do list that I really need taken off my plate. So that's cool.
Hour 5 and 100 million tracks.
Yeah. Wow.
And if you speak to the curators, after a while, there is only so much music that you can listen to. And so that's where AI really comes into play, where it will make a recommendation, and then the curator or the person who's putting the playlist together can say, oh, that makes sense. That works really well.
That's awesome. Cool. So I want to back out and maybe just get your take on some of the marketing trends inside of music and the music industry in general, just because I think you've had some really insightful takes in other interviews that I was able to watch in preparation for this interview. One specifically I thought that was pretty interesting is, you mentioned in the post-pandemic, the music industry now is more profitable than it's ever been from a dollar invested and a dollar in returned in regards to streaming. We no longer create CDs and create the waste that used to happen inside of being able to create hard copies of music and the impact that had on sustainability. So the music industry is thriving, but you had an asterisk of but the artist. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe some of these profitability components have come at the artist's expense? And what do you think we can do about making the artist a little bit more celebrated in the waterfall, so to speak?
So, I mean, I can speak to how we can celebrate them and make sure that they get paid in the area that I'm in now. But just on the overall aspect of the business of music being more profitable, I think sometimes Spotify and some of the streaming services get a bad rap. And if you think about it, the cost to stream music to you and a few million of your close personal friends who listen to a lot of music a day all comes at a cost. So the cost to stream music comes at a cost, the cost to maintain these systems. And so I think I don't think it's anyone's particular fault, but sometimes when you think about the streaming services being lambasted because they're not paying enough, they have to pay the labels, they pay the publishers. I think there are so many pieces of that pie that has to get distributed. Is it being done equitably? Perhaps it could be done differently. And perhaps there are ways for creators to get a larger piece of that pie. But that problem exists in touring. There's someone who talks about the music industry for independent artists. His name is Ari Herstand, and he was in an interview recently with someone in the touring business, and he said, so you take X percentage of the merchandise, you take X percentage of the ticket sales, and then on top of that, you charge consumers a ridiculous amount for those ticket sales, and you own the venue, and so there's all of this. Why doesn't the artist make more? Why don't they make a piece of the concessions? Why don't they make a piece of the food and the drinks that you sell? And so I think structurally it's how the pie is cut. It's not necessarily any one entity's fault. But at the end of the day, when you have really great creators who stop making music because they can no longer make a living, that's when it becomes a sad situation for music fans.
Yeah, totally. And I think in another interview, you talked a little bit about, it might even have been in association with a gentleman that you just mentioned before. I think you had mentioned that he has a whole catalog of online learning classes that he's created for independent artists to actually become better business people, because so many times the creatives have maybe shirked off the business of their creation to third parties, managers and agents. And of course, it's great to have those teams of folks who can help you with that aspect. But can you talk a little bit more about the importance of creators and artists really being entrepreneurs and understanding their business models, and in fact being able to kind of be in more control in the driver's seat in some of these conversations, whether it's self-publishing or going on the road and setting up their own tours. And I imagine there's a lot of ways that artists can take control and work outside the traditional system with digital. And I'd love to get your take on that entrepreneurial aspect of being a musician these days. especially
It
on the
is.
side.
It is so critical. I have spoken to music departments at several universities and have gone on record telling them that if you are training musicians, training young students to leave school with a music degree, and you do not provide them with the tools they need to understand the business, they do graduate if they want to make music for a living as solopreneurs. And it's not really fair that they need to be good at everything, because for many people it's difficult for them to be left brain, right brain. But they also at the same time can't just rely on someone else to manage the money for them, or to review every single document for them. At some point in the world that we live in, they need to have a foundation to understand where the pitfalls are, when they really have to pay attention. And I know that's difficult. Now, you have people like Ari or like Brian Vander Ark, who are extraordinary entrepreneurs and creators of music, who have figured out how to make a living. But I think that we do such a disservice to creators by not making sure that they have the tools necessary to be able to make a living making music, and to ask the right questions, by the way. Sometimes it's a lot about just being aware so that people don't take advantage of you.
Yeah, no, I love that. I wanted to ask you about something that's been in the news recently. There was just a large study that came out after the holidays around COPPA compliance with the social media platforms, basically measuring how much monetization happens of kids 13 and under by all the big platforms. A lot of people can Google this study and kind of go through some of the research, but basically all the social platforms are making tons of money off of kids watching sites like YouTube and TikTok. But then also, you mentioned in an interview that music tastes are really defined by the 14 to 18-year-old segment. How do we approach this dynamic of the trend setting being done by Generation Alpha, but then some of the concerns that people are starting to voice around privacy and COPPA compliance and some of these issues?
So, that is true. Music defines a 14 to 18-year-old in a way that doesn't happen as you mature. You go to school, you get a job, you find a career, and we've been talking about this for ages, right? The big explicit lyric stickers that you see on music, and now digitally, we're actually in the midst of translating our site into different languages. And the team came to me and they said, we need to find a different word for explicit, because explicit actually doesn't translate into other languages.
Wow.
And so we went on all of the DSPs recently and said, okay, well, maybe it's just inappropriate music. But at the end of the day, that E still matters in every single country. I will, slight sidebar, but what we realized, because they told me that only people in the US actually care about explicit lyrics. What I have discovered is, the truth is that it's only if the explicit lyric is in your native language, and then it matters.
Yeah.
But if you're in Sweden or in Germany and you hear an explicit lyric in English, it doesn't hit the same way as if it was in your native language. But at any rate, it is such a personal. Explicit lyrics, I think, with young teens is really a personal issue between the parent and the child. Some people really have no problem with it. Going back to the comments that were made to me that it only matters in the U.S. I think content itself is probably something that we've talked about for so long, but what you're seeing on social media is nothing compared to what is really happening, and these parents that are finding kids having access to things that young children should never have access to.
Right.
And music is just the tip of the iceberg.
It's a much bigger kettle of fish to fry outside of the music industry, and I can, obviously just the proliferation of the adult entertainment industry and how easily accessible that is probably a bigger problem and concern than explicit lyrics on a song, right?
Yeah. So, and violence, I mean, we've talked about it for years, the kids getting desensitized to violence because of video games, because of the videos that they watch. So I think for better or for worse, we've moved on from music. However, these young kids it is fascinating to see how much great old music that these younger generations are making popular again. I think
totally.
Oh gosh, I hope that's not me. You hearing that?
No, I don't hear anything. I'm good.
Oh, okay, good. So yeah. Someone seems to be trying to call me.
Yeah, no problem.
What we see young people rediscovering, I think, is really the opportunity in music. How many times have you seen a resurgence of some 60s or 70s artist? And even with my kids, when they walk in and they discover someone that they think is brand new that I've never heard of before. And so I think that's really where the upside of social media and TikTok is, of experiencing new music in a completely different way that didn't exist before. And by the way, on that note, both for artists and for consumers, 33% of consumers discover music when sitting in businesses and commercial spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that totally makes sense. And I definitely, I found that, like, what is this song? And then you pull out Shazam, and then you're good to go.
So do you use Shazam a lot, by the way? Because it's actually one of the questions we get all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like Shazam is kind of like a verb in technology, right? Like, if you're gonna DocuSign a contract, if you're hearing a song and you don't know it and you can't figure it out, you're gonna Shazam that, right? Like, at least that's what I think.
Yeah, it is a phenomenon, but now it's built into a couple different apps. There's also SoundHound that I think does it really, really well too. But yeah, I think it's one of the things this year that we're going to tap into more, is how are people really discovering music that's played in public spaces. We know that the 33% exists, but how can we really push the envelope and help expose more new artists to people who are music lovers and would have never had the opportunity to hear them, on a playlist or somewhere else.
I love that. So this is the year, in my opinion, of B2B influencer marketing, especially as it pertains to LinkedIn becoming a social platform. For you as a B2B marketer in your current role, are you thinking of the creator economy or influencer marketing at all inside of your marketing mix?
Absolutely. It is part of our marketing mix this year. For us, our influencers are a little bit different, but they are the usual suspects that you might expect in terms of rock star chefs.
Yeah.
They really are. I mean, these chefs are as creative as many of the musicians that we work with, and restaurateurs, bartenders, mixologists. Not just the everyday bartender, but the people who are creating trends in what people are consuming and drinking and the different tastes. Those are some of the influencers that we are working with in the year ahead. We're also working on a series called Pairings, which is connecting artists with some of these people to talk about how, particularly food and music and food and beverage and music, travel and music, some of the finest hoteliers in the country. So we absolutely have influencers. They're just a little bit different than the typical social influencer who might just have a consumer following.
Yeah, totally. Well, look, the rock star mixologist slash celebrity chef, and that could be somebody big that is, on a TV show, down to just your local chef here in San Diego that has 10,000 followers because he's the biggest restaurant and the hippest restaurant to go to here in San Diego. And yeah, they're truly tastemakers, whether it's for a platform like you guys or a spirits brand or, whatever. So I think, yeah, I didn't think about that. And that's a great way for you guys to be approaching your creator marketing. So hats off. That's really cool.
Yeah,
All right.
and by the way, you spent time in Santa Barbara. What about these young winemakers?
Oh my gosh. Yep, totally. Yeah. Anybody who's, like you said, curating a retail experience that's building a passionate following in and around a retail or a business environment, that seems to be a great place to evangelize to, other people in their category. So I love that idea. Very cool. All right, we're down to the home stretch here, 50 minutes in. What are you most excited about? What are you going after for 2020? I'm branding this year 2020 more. So what are you going after this year? What are you excited about for the next 6 months to a year in your role as CMO at Soundtrack Your Brand?
By the way, I've not heard 2020 more. I like it. I'm going to credit you with that, Dylan. So on that note, more of this, a lot of more of the same that we've been doing. The economy is still not exactly where we would all like it to be, particularly with the unrest that's going on in the rest of the world. As much as we're about to talk about that happy music is in, we provide music for businesses globally, over 72,000 businesses globally. And so localization is important. In the US, it's verticalization in terms of really honing in on the biggest categories that we service, which is food and beverage, hospitality, retail. Although we are seeing growth in medical. I think the medical industry hasn't really leaned into music in the past, but creating that experience and comfort when people are in waiting rooms. And there's a young girl who actually was the daughter of someone who worked in the music business for years. And when he was going through chemo, she said, is there anything that you need? And he said, it's just so quiet around here. Now, granted, there are times when people are listening to their own personal music, but in the public spaces, in the gardens, in the areas around, I think there's so much opportunity for growth. At the same time, and by the way, some of these influencer campaigns that we just touched on, but at the same time, because we don't really know where the market is going, there are, I think it's probably about 50-50 of people thinking that interest rates are going to decline and everyone, by the end of the year, we'll be looking at brighter days. I think we really don't know. So we are still focused on expanding, but with continuing capital efficient growth, which is what we did last year. And we had an excellent year. However, this misuse of music in small to mid-sized businesses will be a focus this year. And we expect to see not just that Apollo article of the 260 million plus lawsuit, but some of these smaller businesses with the record companies and publishers finally cracking down on misuse. And again, for many people, it's not their fault. They don't know the laws. But I think they will become more apparent through trade organizations and some of the other spaces to make sure that people know. I've joked about it, but if you're not going to use music properly for the hundred or thousands of people who are walking into your business on a weekly and monthly basis, then make sure you put a sign outside that says, music creators, come and eat for free or get some clothing for free, because they are building a business partially on the back of artists.
Yeah.
And they would want to get paid for their services.
Totally. I think that's what kind of transmissioned me very easy as a movie and MP3 thief in my youth when I was in college. Once it became easy and once I became educated to the idea that, hey, this isn't just a cool technology, it's very easy to pay $1 for a song, or pay $10.99 for a music subscription, or pay $3 for a show, or even pay $30 now for a movie to be able to enjoy it in my living room. maybe I'm at a different place in my life financially now, but the ease of use of the user experience was a big component for me of making it ubiquitous from a technology perspective, but also, a lot of the great trade organizations that put out really hard hitting advertising back in the day that, kind of showed the impact of what piracy was doing, that I think changed a lot of hearts and minds. So I look forward to seeing what you guys will do and what the industry at large will do on the advocacy side, because, like you have talked about in the entrepreneurial plight of artists, they need every tool at their disposal to monetize their art and their creativity. So, Lisa, thanks so much.
And by the way, really quickly, we're not talking about a lot of money. If Spotify is costing you $10 a month, a proper business service with all of the licenses costs somewhere between $30 and $50 a month.
Oh, yeah.
It's not hundreds.
Yep, totally. Better to do things right.
Yeah, exactly. And, if you don't want to, the other thing I implore you to do is shut the music off and see how it sounds.
Totally. Good point. Yeah, these are all great litmus tests, I think, for business owners to kind of think about putting yourselves in the shoes of the artist. So, all right. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show today. For those of you that are following along at home, if you enjoyed my conversation with Lisa today, we would really appreciate it if you subscribe to the podcast, whether you're watching it on YouTube or another audio provider. And if you were so kind as to give us a 5-star review, that actually helps us find a bigger audience through the streaming platforms. And I would say, most importantly, if you enjoyed my conversation with Lisa today, share this interview with a colleague that you think would get some value in listening to it. So, Lisa, anything else you want to plug before we call it a night?
No, thanks, Dylan. Have a great day. And thanks for having me.
I love it. Thanks so much.